So I thought I would just make a video today talking about sobriety when it comes to looking at a lot of these self improvement and manifesting concepts. Sobriety, in my opinion, looking at things with kind of, clear eyes and not becoming overly excited about them, or when we do become excited about them, not staying overly excited, having an appropriate level of excitement and expectation without being like melodramatically excited. I think that kind of approach is very beneficial for a lot of people. Um, my spiritual background, I guess you could say, is more in like the Zen tradition, which is very, very different than the New Thought tradition in terms of how we look at life. And I've always felt very appreciative of that Zen tradition, and it's because I was so um, immersed in it for a long time. It naturally is just the way I look at most aspects of my life, but certainly how I look at my spiritual practice and how I look at this New Thought stuff. So I was probably fortunate compared to many of you in that I always looked at these great LOA teachings mainly as practical tools. And as excited as I got about many of them when I first found out about them, I was able to calm down relatively quickly. I remember when I lived at a Zen center in my early 20s, we used to do these, longer retreats. And it like, a few times a year, there'd be like a 3 or 4 week retreat that would be led by like a guest teacher. Um, and one of these retreats, the theme of it was there is no excitement. And that's a big theme in a lot of Zen teachings, a lot of, more Eastern, you could say mystical teachings in general, not just in the East, but just this sense of calmness. You could probably link it to something like the peace that passeth understanding that's talked about in the Bible. And I just feel like that's such a nice way to go about trying to integrate these spiritual tools into our lives. And we read Neville, we hear Abraham Hicks. People get so excited. And that excitement, especially initially, is probably appropriate. But what happens is a lot of the time people continue to be excited by these ideas, even though they're not getting the results that initially made them excited. So their excitement is no longer appropriate. And a more sober, clear eyed um, viewpoint might be more effective for them. It's like when I first found out about these ideas, one of the things I wanted to do was like manifest a lot more money, right? And I was unable to do that. And if I continue to be excited about these ideas of manifesting a lot of money quickly, um, in the same way as I initially was, I don't think I would have appreciated these teachings or been able to integrate them in the same way. What happened for me in that instance is I did not manifest like out of the blue like a ton more money, but my work life became a lot less cluttered. So I don't think initially I made any more money, but I had a lot more free time when I started really integrating these principles over the first year or so of me finding out about them. Um, and gradually, my income shifted from, primarily working in real estate and having to be very active and working with people to much more passive income from like book royalties and from writing. And so even though the amount of money I made didn't change drastically, how I felt about making that money changed profoundly. But that wasn't a dramatic, like overly exciting experience as it happened. It just happened gradually. And that's like, that was a very productive, fulfilling manifestation for me. Most things in our life are like this in my experiences, working with clients, not just in my own life. It's like when we really want something, we often are too excited about getting it, and it actually hinders the process. It can often help to be more neutral about it. Richard Dotz has written several wonderful books about this. A few to come to mind are like The Manifestation Paradox, I think it's called. And he wrote a book called Light Touch Manifestations. A lot of Richard's earlier books from like 2015, 2016 touch upon this. That excitement can actually be a hindrance to getting this stuff to work in your life. Now, not for everybody. Not for everybody. But if you're doing something like SATs or other Neville techniques and you find that it's hard for you and that level of like kind of like heightened expectation that just doesn't feel sustainable, temper it down some perhaps. Focus more on just feeling more relaxed and fulfilled in your daily life. That might be beneficial, I would say, for a lot of us. Certainly has been for me. I've also been reading recently. I've been reading it really for like over the last year plus. The great Charles Baudouin book about Emile Coué's teachings called Suggestion and Autosuggestion, I believe is the title. Or is it Suggestion and Autosuggestion. I'll put a link below to that book. We've spoken about it several times on this channel. In that book is difficult to read. It's kind of academic sounding. It's old fashioned. The book's 100 years old. But it is such a sober minded appraisal of a lot of these main manifesting ideas that Baudouin is writing about. And when he writes about Coué and writes about some of these other great psychologists and hypnotists, basically from the late 19th century, early 20th century. It's so sober and clear-minded and so helpful and gives so many good suggestions or so much good advice that like I read it like, and I'm reading it now, and like I'm almost ashamed of like how excited I used to get from these ideas. Because I can tell you, this book will show. Most of you are not going to read this book, right? Because a lot of people just don't read anymore. But even people who like to read these books, like LOA books, this is not an easy book, But if you want to read it, most of you can, because most of you have a high school education. Most of you have probably some kind of college level education, and it's not that hard a book to read. You've had to read books that are this difficult to read in school before, and you've done it, right? If you read this book, Suggestion and Autosuggestion, you're gonna probably be shocked. You're gonna realize that the majority of stuff that Neville talks about is concepts that Coué talked about a lot and that Baudouin spells out in this book. For instance, relaxation, what I always talk about. I wrote Relax More, Try Less before I'd ever read this book. And most of the concepts in Relax More, Try Less are talked about in this book, like very clearly. Why suggestion works. Why suggestion, autosuggestion, conscious autosuggestion does not work. What contention is, attention minus effort. I always thought that was, or not always, but like I thought for a long time that was a a term that Neville used and originated. It wasn't. It was something that Baudouin talks about in this book. There's all these things that people think in the Neville community that Neville was the originator of, or the biggest proponent of, and the creator of a lot of these ideas. No. The truth of the matter is these were soberly looked at by psychologists, and specifically Coué and Charles Baudouin, 20, 30 years before Neville was teaching this stuff. And, as I always talk about on this channel, people get very excited by these ideas. There's a lot of sensationalistic marketing about these ideas. There's a ton of spiritual bypassing. And the truth of the matter is almost, I would say, certainly over 90%, but it's probably a much higher percentage. But at least 90% of people are not going to get results that match their excitement whatsoever. They never will from these ideas. That's the sober assessment. And we can change that if we start looking at these ideas more soberly and start looking at our results in a more personal way, and realize it's not a failure, for instance, that when I found out about these ideas, I was unable to manifest a ton of money over the next 2 years. Because what I was able to manifest was still a damn good transformation in terms of my work-life balance, in terms of enjoying my work, for instance. The sensationalism, I manifested this in 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months, it's not going to work for you long-term for most of you. And let's talk about Neville really briefly. Neville made these huge claims, which are great, and I agree with a lot of what he said, or most of what he says in terms of the imagination about how powerful it is. But he also spoke about, near the end of his career, particularly about how, you're going to go through hell. I'll post a link to, Marvin posted this Neville lecture. If someone could put in the comments too what lecture this is, I can't find the title of the lecture, where Neville says, you will go through hell. And, you look at Neville's life, it seemed like he, in the 3D, how it ended for him wasn't exactly, he didn't just ascend to heaven and everything was perfect, right? He had some health issues at the end, for sure. He was a big drinker. It seemed like his wife had some health issues. And to say that this guy just had figured everything out and was living this perfect life in the 3Ds seems absolutely crazy to me. That's a sober assessment. Doesn't mean he wasn't a great teacher. He absolutely was one of my favorite teachers. But when we put teachers on a pedestal or get overly excited about the ideas and don't then critically look at them after 3 months, 6 months, and 12 months when they are not working in the way that they say they're going to work, it means that we can modify our behavior and become more clear-eyed about this stuff and get it to work better. And no one is beyond this, by the way. Emile Coué, who's by far my most favorite LOA teacher, he overpromised too, way too much. He could get great results for people, but how many of the people he got great results, or he helped people get great results for themselves, how many of those people, what percentage actually was able to integrate that into their life long term? A low percentage, I would guess. Even though, over 50% of the people who came to him would have marketed or, significant improvement in their lives initially after, being there and working with him. Long-term success, long-term fulfillment with these ideas probably is going to mean integrating it into the deepest part of your spiritual practices. Like I said at the beginning of this video, for me, a lot of the Zen stuff. And, the deepest part of who you are. It's not just about manifesting things, especially manifesting things in this excited, manic way all the time. I love being sober-minded about this stuff, and the longer I'm into it, the more I read and study books like Suggestion and Auto-Suggestion by Charles Baudouin, the more I'm like, sober-mindedness, clarity, a sense of peace, and like everything is okay right now is really the way to go about doing this, in my opinion, for a lot of us, certainly for me. And I know that, what I'm talking about is just not going to register or resonate for most people in the law of attraction, law of assumption community. But for those that it does register, it will help. And I'm here for that. If you have any questions or would like coaching, I can be reached at radicalcounselor.com.